in 1849, he became part of that German diaspora that left Germany after the 1848 revolutions, and he came to seek his fortune in Australia. And he left Hamburg on the 27th of October 1849, and he arrived in what was called Port Adelaide, Adelaide nowadays, in South Australia, on the 31st of January 1850, age 33. And within 3 weeks of arriving in Adelaide, he got work as an architect, and he was one of the architects that designed a proposed hospital for a Dr. Bayer called the British and German Hospital. Unfortunately, there was a dispute over payment later on, and this is the first record we have of Tilman Gloystein's many court cases. And he did go to court in 1852, and he sought to recover £19.15 for the translation of contract and preparation of drawings and estimates connected with the erection of the German and British hospital. And that in the end ended up as a non-suit. It was decided that poor Tilman had actually misinterpreted the contract, and therefore there was nothing to be settled on him. But he did work in Adelaide as a lithographer, and he was also working for the newspaper, the Mercury. That's an illustration of a design that Tilman did in Germany when he was working as an architect. He didn't come here until he was 33 or come to Australia. And that's an illustration of the station at Port Adelaide that he did when he was working for the Mercury newspaper. So he did get a fair amount of work in the first few years that he was here in the colonies. But then in 1856, he decided to move to Melbourne. And Melbourne at that time, of course, was the boom city. The gold rush was still on, and it was a thriving town, so he obviously felt that he could get some more work there. Unfortunately, within a few weeks of his arrival, now this was only August 1856, he was appearing in the city court, and the article in the Age says, an unfortunate German, a highly respectable looking German named Gloystein, was brought up in the city court on Wednesday on suspicion of having been a lunatic. The unfortunate man, it appeared, is an architect by profession and has been several years in the colonies. Recently, however, he has been without occupation, and during the last fortnight he has been residing in a boarding house in Lonsdale Street. His altered circumstances appear to have preyed on his mind, and on 2 or 3 occasions of late his conduct to his fellow lodgers has been such as to cause the charge of lunacy to be referred against him. Well, the bench ordered that he be looked at by the German Association, and we don't know what the outcome of that was, because during the First World War, a lot of the records associated with German history and the German Association were actually destroyed. So, but the very next day, the bench decided that they were of the opinion that the circumstances did not warrant them ordering his detention any longer, so he was released. Then in 1860, now this was the year that the St Kilda Council, a newly formed council of the new district that was called St Kilda, they decided to run a competition to design the St Kilda Botanical Gardens. They weren't as yet established, but the land had been set aside, 16 acres, to establish these gardens. So Tilman Gloystein entered the competition, and against 10 other entrants, he actually won. So that was quite a highlight of his life, and he wrote to the town clerk and said, I do myself the honour to inform you that your design for the public gardens has been accepted by the council, and the provision of £10 awarded to you as its author. That was what the town clerk wrote to Tilman Gloystein. And he very happily wrote back and said that he was very pleased to be awarded the £10, and that he would now like the sum of £20 for laying out the gardens. And that was agreed to, and he was given the £20, he was given the necessary tools and pegs, and he had to engage a man to assist him in that work, but that was also at the expense of the council. And he did lay out the gardens, and to this day, this north-south axis here, north-south axis, all this central planting, these lovely little circular walkways and sort of arabesques and all the garden beds on either side, most of the material to hand, and wisely discarding merely formal geometric lines, has produced a most elaborate and tasteful design, presenting indubitable evidence of an intimate and correct acquaintance with the true principles of landscape gardening. And the Argus considered that the design, although somewhat elaborate, is not marked by the formality that so frequently characterises plans of a similar kind, and whilst avoiding the mistake of dividing the ground into small plots, he lays out ample space for both promenade, riding or driving, carriage driving, interspersed with numerous shrubberies. So his design was very, very well received at the time and loudly applauded. Unfortunately, that same year, 1860, his triumph was rather marred by his court appearance for drunkenness. He was several times has been remanded on the charge of drunkenness, and he was again charged with habitual intoxication. The bench cautioned him and discharged him, but only 2 weeks later he was again up before the bench, described as an incorrigible vagrant and drunkard, and he was sentenced to 3 months imprisonment. So he really had quite a hard time of it, interspersed with some moments of actual accomplishment. And he must have kept working, because in 1864 he was again in court and suing for monies owed, and he was described as an architect. So he obviously did get a fair amount of work, even in these times, in between times when he was being charged with lunacy and drunkenness. In 1866, when he was residing in Lonsdale in King Street in Melbourne, he actually applied for space at the Intercolonial and Paris exhibitions to display his drawings. The Intercolonial exhibition was wound up, and all of it was sent over to Paris for the International Exhibition of 1867, and Gloystein actually displayed some of his drawings there. And again in 1866 there was another lawsuit for monies owed, but unfortunately that same year he was again in court charged with lunacy, but the magistrate did not think the facts alleged sufficient to warrant his detention, and he was discharged. So whatever his sort of lunacy was, whether it was just that sort of being drunk and behaving in a bad way, or whether he was bipolar, we used to call it manic depression, or whether he might have been schizophrenic, we just simply don't know. But he certainly had moments of lucidity. But unfortunately in 1967 he had another 2 court appearances, this time accused of insulting behaviour, and was discharged with caution, but the second time he got to jail for 2 months. And again in 1983 he sued for monies owed, and in 1877, in November, at the age of 61, he was admitted to the Kew Asylum for mental disorder, which was described as melancholia, which we probably would say nowadays depression. But his details were recorded as single, architect. He is living at Emerald Hill, South Melbourne. He was in fair health, Protestant and German. And then the following year, in 1878, he was transferred to what was then called the Sunbury Asylum, later became known as the Sunbury Asylum. And there, after 16 years in the Sunbury Asylum, he died on this day, 120 years ago, on the 22nd of January 1894, and he was buried on the 24th of January here in the Sunbury Cemetery. So, although Tilman Gloystein's name perhaps is not as famous as other Germans in the horticultural and illustrious sphere, such as Baron Ferdinand von Mueller, who became the director of the Royal Botanic Gardens Melbourne, or Dr. Schomburg, who was director of the Royal Botanic Gardens in Adelaide, or even Ludwig Becker, who went off with the Burke and Wills expedition and died, but not before he sent back all those thousands of wonderful illustrations of the flora of Central Australia, which are now at the State Library in Victoria. But Tilman Gloystein did leave us a great heritage in the St Kilda Botanical Gardens, and this is still intact today, the central core of the gardens, and it's recognised by Heritage Victoria as being a fine example of 19th century landscaping and garden design, and for that reason